I'm very pleased to give a presentation in this series of lectures, as we probably are all. What combines us is the enthusiasm of archival data. The importance of metadata work has become a conscious element of the archivists. But as we know, things always have their histories. In this talk, I give you a brief historical overview of the ways how the Folklore Archives and its collections, or fonts, if we use the American term, have been organized, or more precisely understood, in the Finnish Literature Society. I'll try to, okay, can you see my second slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. So for this matter, vocabulary uses may be seen as paradigms in the academic disciplines and the archives that have been interrelated to them. Broadly speaking, words and concepts serve as useful and fundamental tool for communication and acquiring knowledge. Understanding of the terms in folklore studies and ethnology, we not only learn specialized vocabulary, but words and how they go together. Historically, in folklore archives, the starting point of everything has been, as Dan Benamos has noted, and I quote, folklorists transferred oral law from the context of the so-called natural language, in which ambiguities, ambivalencies, and multiplicity of meanings appear to reign, and attempted to consider them terms in the language of science, whose meanings are clear and specific reference. However, the term ideal type of folklore was introduced by Lauri Honko when debating with Benamos about the understanding of folklore texts on the archive shelves. The term, according to Honko, is an analytical tool providing common concept to realize existing folklore forms. But as we can see, this Honko concept in the course of time lost its relevance, at least in indexing vernacular discourses. So what kind of practices have shaped the keyword use or subject headings in the folklore archives of the FLS? Because from now on, I prefer to use FLS instead of every time pronouncing Finnish Literature Society. Collectors had kept their manuscripts at home until the year 1891 in Finland, when FLS main building was completed. Now manuscripts from collector researchers could be moved to one house in the middle of Helsinki, and many of you have visited here in the place. The early archival work was approached top-down. It wasn't a secret. Principles of manuscript arrangement were mastered only by Karle Kroon, who checked all the incoming folklore. And needless to say that Kroon wished to have epic poems the most at the time. He also recruited folklore collectors who often were from the upper class or upper middle class background. He did not organize the materials the way we nowadays understand as the beginning of organizing or indexing archive material. Rather, at the beginning of the 20th century, there started to evolve a sort of understanding of the collections that were kept on the shelves, although in disarray. Despite Kroon's gatekeeping position, the so-called fake folklore, such as ballads and rhymed folk songs that were spread through the print media, were anyway sent to the Finnish Literature Society's archives. By now, and because of this unwanted folklore, the implicit realization of genres was already there, although as the irritating element of the folklore collecting and archiving work. Interestingly, legends were absent in many of the manuscripts, and my colleague Pertti Anttonen has pointed out in his brand new article that, unlike elsewhere in Scandinavia or Germany, the Grimm's Deutsche Sagen and the tale type understanding had hardly any influence on the Finnish folklore scholarship. So basically, Kaarle Kroon just ignored the idea of tales living in folks' mouths. It was the thing he didn't want to collect or to get into the folklore archives. Anyways, the first folklore catalogue was completed in 1903. And according to it, from the early 19th century until 1875, the total number of folklore items was 50,000, including epic poems, charms, songs, proverbs, and riddles. Note, no tales. And from 1876 to 1900, the number was 250,000. The impact of one man, Kaarle Kroon, in activating the collector was obvious. Another milestone, besides the FLS house, the building itself, that's labeled the vocabulary use in the Finnish folklore research and the archive practices, was the institutionalization of the folklore archives within the Finnish Literature Society, which happened in 1934. Basically, folklore archives was not founded, or it was not established, but it got for the first time its own premises or own walls, which actually exist still today in the same place within the house. In spite of the premises, the practice of keeping the manuscripts in organized fashion was still lacking. The materials were increasing all the time. And this first catalogue, which I just referred, it could not offer a valid overview of what kind of things the archives really had. It had no proper archival directory. Martti Haavio, who followed Kaarle Kroon as the head of the folklore archives in the early 1930s, concluded that if one wants to study the views on devil, she or he has to go through all the 600,000 items of folklore. So the idea of organized and catalogued archival collections was evolving from the need to use these 600,000 items better. And this realization happened among the Finnish scholars, especially after they visited to Sweden and their discussions with the Swedish colleagues. And one of the results was the book binding of the original manuscripts sent by the several collectors. And here you see the book bound collections. These were book bound in the mid 1930s, and we had then a new term collection, but in Finnish it's sidos. So that emerged in the vocabulary of the Folklore Archives for the first time. Not only book-bound manuscripts, but also the term collection, kokoelma, became now materialized. By now, it was evident that the Folklore Archives needed also a proper indexing system. Martti Haavio and his team had two options: either the Estonian model, in which folklore was organized according to thematic types, for example, animal husbandry, all kinds of folklore or narratives or whatever were put into the same under the same theme called animal husbandry, or then folk healing or love. Or the other option was the Swedish model, where materials were put in genre order. The Finns ended up the Swedish one, or the Scandinavian system, in which the material, i.e. a specific genre, was first typed out verbatim on cards. And then there was a separate card for every charm, legend, riddle, ballad, which then were divided into the subject matter registers. All original sources were written to a card so that the info could be checked from the original documents later, if needed. And here I have, hopefully you see, two photos of original book-bound manuscripts, sidos, two sidos, and how in the first round a student of folklore studies or an archivist, often perhaps the same person, picked up clear boundary genres out of the manuscript. In this example, you probably see some of the signs marked as red. We have the codes like C, E, B4, A1, and so forth. So then when picked up these genres, they were typed out verbatim on cards like this. This is the cards of the type C, and C refers to proverb. Then cards were organized according to the main noun, and then alphabetically in the drawer. In this drawer, there are the proverbs whose main words start with the letter L, and one of the keywords here is leski akka, meaning hag, widow. So we are talking about folksy and agrarian way of life. Different genres have their own registers or drawers, which may include, depending on a genre, a reference system to the cultural geographic information, or at times reference to other genres. As you can see, the concept of a genre in Finnish, perinnelaji, which, if I translate it literally, means tradition species, became more and more crucial tool and keyword in the Finnish folklore establishment. Over the years, this kind of genre classification complicated from the Kruun's time understanding of folklore, which basically meant epic poems or laments or European type of fairy tale or myth. But then over the course of time, the Finnish genre system expanded, and here is the list of the genres that Folklore Archives actively have been using until 1990s, altogether 60 different genre types. A1, fairy tale, C, proverb, B, for supernatural belief, E, ethnographic description, and so on. Those people who worked decades in the archives, they learned these signs by nature. These signs were also used in the new database from which was taken to archive in 1992. This genre list of genres was helpful tool in picking up different folklore genres from the incoming manuscripts or sendings, which were done until recently, because I have done it as a part of my internship in the folklore archives, and generations of Finnish folklorists used to do this, picking up the genres from the manuscripts. As I said, the list was not this long in the beginning of or from the Karle Kruun's time, but it has expanded a lot. And here you'll see a list of one collector or a correspondent and what sort of folklore she has sent to the archives throughout the years. As you can see here, she started her sendings in 1961, and it went on until 1977, but I know that she has sent even in the 1990s. But you see, this is an extract from the Folklore Archives' own intra-database on the names of the tradition bearers, which is also a kind of a keyword which came into being in 1960s onward. Basically, this database was done in coping the information that was once written to the cards. And this is at times randomly still in use in folklore archives. If we want to look at like this woman, Maire Hirvonen, that what kind of, in which questionnaires she has been responding. So I can quickly check that, okay, I'm going to check now this contemporary culture questionnaire and what kind of stuff she has narrated or sent to the archives. As you could see, the crucial element in the list of Maire was her different folklore genres. The background of the more open attitude toward different kind of folklore goes back to the time of Martti Haavio, 1930s, and the mass questionnaires, in Finnish we say keruut, that were first time organized in folklore archives of the Finnish Literature Society. And it was a new kind of method of acquiring data where ordinary laymen could take part in the collection. If we earlier had, like Karle Kruun had his middlemen, those upper class middlemen, now this mass questionnaires, the direction was that archives was directly targeting people in the provinces. And the first questionnaire was the Kalevala Jubileum in 1935-36, or then a year later there was Village Brawls, questionnaire on village fights. And they had the themes that everyone could take part. And as the result, Finnish Literature Society's Folklore Archives founded the respondent network, who consisted of local rapporteurs, as Karl Helman Tilhagen called these kind of people. The idea of the respondent network was from Sweden again, and now more and more lay collectors became the core subjects of the collecting work. Questionnaires were planned in targeting people all around in the country, emphasizing competition between different provinces. Martti Haavio stated that the whole country should be activated in documenting the forefathers' legacy. What is surprising and actually little studied so far, that the best collectors were promised a prize money, a model taken from Sweden again. Moreover, regular lay collectors were also given some cash as the reward, and they sometimes quite actively wrote to the archives and said that, oh, I'm now so poor, but I've been sending you so much manuscript that wouldn't you give me a little cash reward? And then archive staff, one of them, usually Haavio, would reply that's usually we don't give any money, but in this time you get a little award, cash reward. So there really was cash. The casting without doubt increased the number of incoming manuscripts and sendings to the archives. Through the principle of competition, Finnish Literature Society and Folklore Archives aimed at become the biggest folklore archives in the world. Swedish counterparts would have had the title, but their collections were divided into 3 different institutions. So the Swedes couldn't be the biggest. This was important in Finland. The world's biggest folklore archives was based on the genre cards that served as the basis for many theses, student works, etc. The new paradigm emerged when the contexts of tradition became focus of interest. From texts to context was not only a scientific revolution in our field, but it also meant a new way to gather knowledge. Here you see in the photo on the left, Anneli Asplund, a ballad researcher, and on the right, Annikki Kaivola-Brekenhöj, a riddle scholar. The photo was taken in 1970, and Annikki and Anneli are somewhere in eastern Finland. And I think this photo reflects the change of everything in folklore studies of that era. Firstly, folklorists no longer worked only in picking up genres from the incoming archival manuscripts, but they eagerly and actively developed fieldwork conventions. Secondly, folklore studies feminicized, as did many other disciplines within the humanities from the late 1960s onwards. It was a matter of generational shift too, because it was the Finnish Literature Society staff who went to the field. But what were Annikki and Anneli looking for? The answer is the context of traditions. That is the specific social situation in which particular folklore items were actually employed. The outcome of this was a bunch of new terms, such as kenttätyö, fältarbetet in Swedish, meaning fieldwork. In the field, tradition species or genres were not clear. In their everyday communication, people spoke all kinds of stories, and folklore all of a sudden showed up different than what folklorists had used to in the archives. Narrative orientation brought new words such as field notes, context information, transcriptions from the recordings, research ethics, and so forth. Moreover, everything was now interpreted as tradition of something. There were children's tradition, lumberjack tradition, factory workers tradition, university students tradition, etc. So narrow definitions of folklore was opening up. Everyday narratives as the Folklore Archives' key terminology came from other direction too, since life writing questionnaires, or we call it writing competitions. Note again, the idea of competing something were also introduced in the late 1960s. In this writing competition method, people were and are asked to write to the archives freely on a given topic. So in this sense, folklore or vernacular expression is something that's a person, him or herself, decides how to express on certain things. And we don't try to give some kind of boundaries how to express. Finally, if I sum up the vocabulary shifts in the folklore archives in Finland, the transformation processes have been slow. For example, folklore genres were extracted from the incoming manuscript until late 1990s, as I said before, or even early 2000. Nobody really knows when this was given up, but it was done smoothly. It wasn't like a statement that now we stop picking up genres from narrative texts or some sendings. No, it's just, you know, faded away. Then digital database, 1992 Folklore Archives cut an intra database, but it was more rather a tool for an archivist. Researchers couldn't use it. It wasn't for them. Sign of this slow transformation, or maybe it can be called as the value of the folkloristic methods, is also then when one can realize that many of the analysis are still nowadays being done manually, still using the genre cards or comparing and close reading original manuscripts. The first digital shift if we don't count this 1992 ATJ system, the first proper digital shift was the digitalization of ancient poems of the Finnish people, that is the epics behind the Kalevala. And this was done with the help of the Estonians in late 1990s. And there is a proper folklore corpus, which can be, the analysis can be done from your own computer wherever you are around the world. You don't have to go to Helsinki to read these epics. But I want to mention one more recent development in the Finnish folklore archives. There is the filter project among the Finns and Estonians, which the project combined 4 digital databases so that the researchers can study various forms like intertextuality and poetic variation across Finnish, Ingrian, Karelian and Estonian oral lore. This filter project is a mix of folklorists and computer scientists, and thus far the group develops their tools and methods, but I'm very eager to read the first folklore analysis of their materials. The demand for online materials may well be the latest vocabulary shift in the sphere of archives and even in the folklore studies. I personally look forward to this since it will make the research work more time-consuming. However, it will not solve the problem of interpretation of vernacular, or why people have customs in common, or why communities maintain their views and tradition, because this needs human thinking. Thank you.